Welcome to Hockey West Talks podcast. Today I'll be talking about what is wrong with the Chicago Blackhawks. The Chicago Blackhawks have been floating around in mediocrity since 2017. There are a slew of reasons for why they are in the position they are in right now. The main reasons why the Chicago Blackhawks have been struggling since 2017 is because of these reasons. 1. Bad trades and signings. 2. Bad cap management. 3. Failure to draft and develop prospects. 4. Lack of secondary scoring. And 5. Lack of offensive and defensive depth. The Chicago Blackhawks have had many bad signings and trades with Stan Bowman as GM. Here are the worst signings made by the Blackhawks under Stan Bowman. In 2013, Brian Bickle was signed to a 4-year extension worth $4 million per season. After a tremendous postseason run in 2012-2013, Bickle was rewarded handsomely to a 4-year extension. This contract ended up being so bad that they had to include Toivo Teravainen in the deal in order for the Hurricanes to eat the contract. Corey Crawford 2014, 6 years, $6 million per season. It was understandable why Corey Crawford was signed to this extension, because the first 3 years of this deal, Crawford was one of the best goalies in the league, but in the last 3 years, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Jonathan Toews 2015, 8-year extension worth $10.5 million per season. After leading the Blackhawks to their third Stanley Cup in 5 years, the Blackhawks ensured their captain would remain a Blackhawk for a long time. Both he and Patrick Kane signed the exact same contract, meaning that two players would take up $21 million in cap space. It wouldn't be such a big issue if Toews was producing like Patrick Kane, but the issue is Toews isn't producing to the standard of this contract. I would compare Toews to a player like Patrice Bergeron, but Bergeron makes a whole $3 million less than Jonathan Toews. Brent Seabrook 2016, 8-year extension worth $6.8 million per season. This was a horrible signing right from the start because Seabrook was not the star defenseman that the Blackhawks thought he was. The Blackhawks are paying Seabrook as much as the Blues are paying Pietrangelo, but Seabrook isn't even on Pietrangelo's level of production. Seabrook is due $6.8 million for another 4 seasons, and no team is going to be taking on that contract, so the Blackhawks will be stuck with that contract and an aging Brent Seabrook. Here are the worst trades by the Blackhawks under Stan Bowman. In 2010, the Chicago Blackhawks traded Dustin Byfuglien, along with Brent Sopel and Ben Eager, to the Atlanta Thrashers for Joey Crabb, Jeremy Marin, Marty Reasoner, a first-round pick in 2010, Kevin Hayes, and a second-round pick in 2010, Justin Hall. The Blackhawks undervalued Dustin Byfuglien big time. They really only got Kevin Hayes in exchange for Dustin Byfuglien, and he never played for the team. Byfuglien went on to be a star defenseman with the Winnipeg Jets after they moved from Atlanta to Winnipeg. In 2013, Michael Frolik was traded to the Winnipeg Jets for a 3rd-round pick in 2013, John Hayden, and a 5th-round pick in 2013, Luke Johnson. Michael Frolik was underutilized during his second tenure with the Blackhawks and was very undervalued when he was basically gifted to the Winnipeg Jets. Michael Frolik still had a few more productive seasons in the league after he was traded, while the players drafted never panned out. In 2014, Nick Leddy was traded to the New York Islanders for Ken Simpson, TJ Brennan, Veli Polka, and Anders Nilsson. Nick Leddy was in Joe Quenneville's doghouse when he was with the Blackhawks and was basically traded for a bag of pucks. While Leddy flourished as a top pair defenseman with the Islanders, none of the players the Blackhawks got back helped the team at all. In 2016, Philip Deneau was traded to the Montreal Canadiens along with a 2nd-round pick in 2018 for Dale Weiss and Thomas Fleischmann. At the time, this was not that bad of a trade, but now it is a horrible trade because Deneau has turned into a great two-way center, while neither Dale Weiss or Thomas Fleischmann did anything memorable for the Blackhawks. In 2017, Artemi Panarin was traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets along with Tyler Mott and a 6th-round pick in 2017 for Brandon Saad, Anton Forsberg, and a 5th-round pick in 2018. This is by far the worst trade by Stan Bowman. While Artemi Panarin has turned into one of the elite forwards in the NHL, Brandon Saad has struggled to stay healthy the past few seasons. In 2019, the Blackhawks reacquired Andrew Shaw from the Montreal Canadiens for a 2nd and 7th-round pick in 2020 and a 3rd-round pick in 2021. Andrew Shaw was a critical part of those Stanley Cup teams, but it's safe to say that he is no longer the player he used to be. When the Blackhawks reacquired Shaw from the Canadiens, they didn't have to give up so many picks, because the Canadiens were desperate just to get rid of his contract at that point. Also in 2019, Chicago dealt Artem Anisimov to the Ottawa Senators for Zach Smith. While Anisimov isn't exactly lighting it up in Ottawa, Anisimov was a good fit in Chicago and a good veteran center. Zach Smith makes $1.2 million less than Anisimov and only has 11 points during the 2019-2020 season. And now a word from our sponsor. Check out my hockey blog at hockeywiztalkshockey.blogspot.com. Also visit my Facebook page, Mr. HockeyWiz777, and my Instagram, Mr. HockeyWiz77. Winning a Stanley Cup is a blessing and a curse for a franchise. By winning a cup, it hikes up every player's value. A huge issue with the Chicago Blackhawks is their cap management. 6 players on the Blackhawks take up the vast majority of their cap. Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane make $10.5 million per season. This totals $21 million per season. Duncan Keith makes $5.5 million per season, and Brent Seabrook makes $6.8 million per season, totaling $12.3 million per season for Keith and Seabrook. Brandon Saad makes $6 million per season, and Crawford also makes $6 million per season. The 6 players combined to make $45.3 million per season, so you only have $38.7 million to spend on the rest of the roster. Some other highly paid players are Calvin DeHaan at $4.55 million per season, Olli Mata at $4.1 million per season, Andrew Shaw at $3.9 million per season, and Zach Smith at $3.1 million per season. These players combined to make $15.65 million per season. 10 players on the Blackhawks take up $60.95 million of their cap space, which means they only have around $23 million to spend on the rest of the roster. The Blackhawks have already re-signed Alex DeBrincat, but they still need to re-sign Dylan Strome and Dominic Kulibuk. Chicago has around $10.5 million in cap space left to re-sign both Strome and Kulibuk, which means they can't be re-signed to long-term deals because they don't have enough cap space right now. A player the Blackhawks could potentially move is Brandon Saad. He is their most attractive trade asset. Saad is still on the books at $6 million until 2021, which is not too bad if he plays on a contending team with the right players. Don't be looking for a whole lot in exchange for Saad. At this point, he is worth mid-level prospects and conditional second-round pick. The purpose of this trade would be to create cap room to re-sign Strome and Kulibuk, and also to add depth to the roster. The smart thing to do is to re-sign both Strome and Kulibuk to 3-year deals and make them earn that long-term extension. When the Blackhawks were winning championships, they were not doing a good job of drafting. Let's take a look at their first and second round picks from 2010 to 2015. In 2010, with the 24th pick, the Blackhawks selected Kevin Hayes over Evgeny Kuznetsov. With the 35th pick, the Blackhawks selected Ludwig Rensfeld over Justin Falk. With the 58th pick, the Blackhawks selected Ken Simpson over Jason Zucker. With the 60th pick, the Blackhawks selected Stephen Johns over Radko Gudas. In 2011, the Blackhawks selected Mark McNeil with the 18th pick over Oscar Klefbom, and Philip Deneau with the 26th pick. Adam Clendening with the 36th pick over John Gibson, and Brandon Saad with the 43rd pick. In 2012, the Blackhawks selected Toivo Teravainen with the 18th pick, and Dylan Fournier with the 48th pick over Colton Parayko. In 2013, the Blackhawks selected Ryan Hartman with the 30th pick over Tristan Jarry, and Carl Dahlstrom with the 51st pick over Jake Gunsel. In 2014, the Blackhawks selected Nick Schmaltz with the 21st pick over David Pastrnak. In 2015, the Blackhawks drafted Graham Knott with the 54th pick over Vince Dunn. By drafting these players, it would allow the Blackhawks to move their veteran players and not have to overpay them. Now that the Blackhawks have some blue chip prospects, that could have an effect on whether or not they keep certain players. After winning the Stanley Cup in 2010, there were some cap casualties, but the biggest casualty was Dustin Byfuglien. The Byfuglien trade still happens, he still gets dealt to the Atlanta Thrashers, but for a different trade package. In exchange for Byfuglien, the Blackhawks get Johnny Oduya and a first-round pick in 2010. Even though Oduya is no big buff, he is a good two-way defenseman that can play in the top 4. After winning the Stanley Cup in 2013, the Blackhawks do not need to re-sign Bickell because they have better players awaiting in the system. Because the Blackhawks don't re-sign Bickell, they will not have to trade Toivo Teravainen yet. Nick Leddy still gets moved to the New York Islanders, but for a totally different package. Nick Leddy gets dealt to the New York Islanders for Griffin Reinhart. Then, Griffin Reinhart is dealt to the Edmonton Oilers for a first-round pick in 2015, which turns into Matt Barzal and a second-round pick in 2015. The Blackhawks don't need to sign Crawford to such a long-term deal. They could have re-upped him to a 3-year deal at $6.5 million per season. As by the 2015-16 season, Gibson would be ready to take the reins as the number 1 goalie, which would allow the Blackhawks to trade him before the 2015-16 season. During the 2015 offseason, the Chicago Blackhawks trade Corey Crawford to the Buffalo Sabres for Joel Armia, Michael Neuvirth, and a first-round pick in 2016, Charlie McAvoy. there will be a slew of changes that take place during the 2015 offseason, as the Blackhawks are going forth with a bit of a youth movement. The first major change is deciding to trade away Jonathan Toews. This is a really tough decision to make because while he captained the Blackhawks to 3 Stanley Cups, re-signing him to a long-term extension would mean he would be making $10.5 million per season. And I'm not sure that he's going to be worth $10.5 million in 6 to 7 years. Also, think about the haul the Blackhawks could get in return for him, coming right off a Stanley Cup victory that summer. Jonathan Toews is traded to the New Jersey Devils for Adam Henrique, Adam Larson, and a first-round pick in 2015, Timo Meier. 2015 would also be the perfect time to trade Duncan Keith. It might sound crazy, but his value was at an all-time high after winning a Conn Smythe trophy that summer. The return is too good to pass up. Chicago Blackhawks trade Duncan Keith to the LA Kings for Jake Muzzin, Martin Jones, and a first-round pick in 2017, Robert Thomas. Brandon Saad gets traded to the Boston Bruins instead of the Columbus Blue Jackets. In exchange for Saad, the Blackhawks get Riley Smith and a second-round pick in 2015, Oliver Kylington. In the 2016 offseason, 2 changes are made. The first change is that the Blackhawks don't trade Phillip Danault, who is on a cheap contract. The second change is that they don't re-sign Brent Seabrook. Brent Seabrook is no longer needed because of the trades and prospects they've drafted, so he becomes a UFA. The Blackhawks don't trade Artemi Panarin yet, as he is still a core player. Chicago loses Riley Smith to the Vegas Golden Knights in the expansion draft. Jeff Petrie is traded to the Montreal Canadiens for a second-round pick in 2017, Michael DiPietro, and a second-round pick in 2018, Kevin Ball. It wouldn't make sense for the Blackhawks to bring back Andrew Shaw because there isn't any space for him on the roster. Artem Anisimov will still be traded to the Senators, but just for some draft picks. Because the Blackhawks drafted Tristan Jarry, they don't need to sign Robin Lehner in free agency. Because of the arrival of David Pastrnak as one of the elite goal scorers in the league, that has allowed the Blackhawks to trade Patrick Kane. Patrick Kane still has plenty of trade value and would fetch a great return. Chicago Blackhawks trade Patrick Kane and Justin Falk to the Carolina Hurricanes for Andrei Svechnikov, Jacob Slavin, and a first-round pick in 2021. Check out my other podcasts on SoundCloud.com/MrHockeyWiz777. After all of these moves, the Chicago Blackhawks will have a much younger lineup that could be contenders with a few adjustments. Secondary scoring is the major issue for the Blackhawks in real life, but with the roster I am assembling right now, that won't be a problem. The Blackhawks make a few trades for salary cap purposes. First, the Blackhawks trade Toivo Teravainen to the Columbus Blue Jackets for Sonny Milano, Anthony Duclair, Boone Jenner, and a first-round pick in 2020. The rights of Artemi Panarin are traded to the New York Rangers for a second-round pick in 2019. Jason Zucker and Radko Gudas are traded to the Colorado Avalanche for Nikita Zadorov, Ryan Graves, a second-round pick in 2020, and a conditional first-round pick in 2021 if Colorado wins the Stanley Cup. Alex DeBrincat is traded to the San Jose Sharks for a first-round pick in 2021. Chicago Blackhawks also trade Adam Henrique and Jake Muzzin to the Detroit Red Wings for Michael Rasmussen, Madison Bowie, Taro Hirose, and a second-round pick in 2021. Adam Larson and Nikita Zadorov are traded to the LA Kings for Derek Forbort and a second-round pick in 2020. This is how the lineup looks like at the beginning of the 2019-2020 season. The first line is Jake Guentzel, Matt Barzal, and David Pastrnak. The second line is Timo Meier, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and Andrei Svechnikov. The third line is Luke Kunin, Phillip Danault, and Robert Thomas. The fourth line is Anthony Duclair, Boone Jenner, and Joel Armia. The first D pair is Jacob Slavin and Charlie McAvoy. Second D pair is Ryan Graves and Colton Parayko. Third D pair is Vince Dunn and Derek Forbort. Goalies are John Gibson and Tristan Jarry. The spares are Sonny Milano, Michael Rasmussen, Mitchell Stevens, Oliver Kylington, Madison Bowie, Kevin Ball, and Michael DiPietro. The most noticeable weakness of the Chicago Blackhawks is the lack of depth on offense and defense. Having depth is the key to having success over an 82-game regular season and in the playoffs. With the lineup the Chicago Blackhawks have above, they not only have a deadly top six, but they have great role players, a solid defense, and a star goalie. Everything you need to win a Stanley Cup. By doing this and looking back at the moves the Blackhawks made over the past decade, it is clear that the Chicago Blackhawks panicked to re-sign some players, but at the same time, gave up essential players for next to nothing. A common trend with dynasty teams is that while they get glory of winning Stanley Cups, the decade afterwards will be miserable because the core gets older, but they are still getting paid like they are still superstars. On top of that, in their quest to win Stanley Cups, dynasty teams tend to forget about the draft entirely and focus on signing proven veterans rather than developing younger prospects. It is interesting to note that before the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup in 2010, they didn't win a cup in 50 years. Prior to winning 3 cups in 5 years, the Blackhawks were the laughingstock of the original 6 teams. In fact, during the original 6 era, the Blackhawks only got the players other teams did not want, so they were regarded as the wasteland of the NHL. The Chicago Blackhawks are certainly more respected now after winning 3 Stanley Cups, but historically, the Chicago Blackhawks are not truly a winning franchise. On my next podcast, I'll be talking about what is wrong with the San Jose Sharks.